So now I'd like to welcome Dr. David Nicholas to the stage. Dr. Nicholas is a professor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary and has been studying the employment experiences among people with autism and the implications. Dr. Nicholas. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
It'll be on.
Thank you very much. Can I draw your attention firstly to two piles of paper on your table? One is an information sheet that is describing a study entitled Development of Nationally Leading Curricula for Job Coach Training in Autism. You're welcome to complete the second sheet, which is a more general survey entitled Needs and Strategies for Success in the Workplace for People with Developmental Disabilities. But can I ask that you first read that information sheet to understand the details of the study? Does that sound okay? There will be a drop-off box at the registration table in the break and at the end of the day. So if you decide you want to complete that, feel free to drop those in that drop box. And thank you very much. If people have questions, I'll be there about the study or the survey, and I'd welcome those questions. For those of you on the webcast, there is a link to read the information sheet, and the survey is there. So on the PowerPoint here is the survey. If people don't access that, feel free to email me, and my email is here so to access that survey. Thank you for considering that. Now, I want to move to a presentation, and I need to thank a group of folks across the country. The largest group are here in Alberta. Some of them are here today. And we collected data about the employment needs of individuals, the experiences they had, and the service providers that were providing services. They might be folks like job coaches who we've heard about today. We collected data in Alberta, BC, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia. And I want to talk a little bit about what we were trying to accomplish here. The aims of this research included a better understanding of vocation or employment-related experiences of adults with autism, with a related focus specifically on services offered by vocation-related autism-based agencies. Think about the applicability of some of these findings for other developmental issues. Our hope here was to identify things that work, the facilitators, and the challenges, the barriers to constructive employment opportunities and outcomes for, in this case study, people with autism. Now I will go through this very quickly. I realize we're before a coffee break on a Friday afternoon, and this isn't the time to go into a lot of research. So if you bear with me, we'll get to the good stuff. But I wanted you to know who was in this research. So first of all, we did an online survey of autism vocation resources across Canada, and then interviews with key informants, namely individuals with autism, parents or caregivers, service providers, and lastly, employees offering jobs to these individuals. Let's move quickly to what we found. First of all, the national survey focused on 4 broad areas, and these were 3 of them on the screen. First of all, organizational capacity, which was getting at the support services or the organization's ability to support the vocational needs of people with disability within its resource base. Secondly, we wanted to look at the broader systems capacity. What I mean by that is the organization's support for broad issues of adult well-being. We've heard about how it's not just about employment or vocation, but it's other issues that have a bearing on good outcomes in moving forward and finding those opportunities for people to thrive and move forward. So those are things related to, could be housing or transportation, community integration, social support, poverty, dealing with some of those issues. And what was the capacity to support individuals facing some of those barriers? Thirdly, we wanted to look at service planning and evaluation, which really was looking at support service organizations, infrastructure in terms of service planning, carefully planning and advancing services, and also having intentional evaluation so that they continue to move forward. And finally, we turned the dime a little bit and looked at community capacity. So rather than organizations telling us what they were doing within their organization, how well they were doing in terms of meeting need, we wanted to ask about how well we were doing in our communities. And that's that bottom point, which really was saying how well are we meeting the vocational needs of individuals with disability. So here's a depiction of how participants said we were doing. First of all, in terms of organizational capacity, on the bar graph on the left, on a scale ranging from strongly disagree, ranked as 0, to strongly agree at 100, relative to the statement that respondents' organizations supported the vocational needs of people with autism, the average score was 88.9, suggesting that organizations generally felt that their organization was providing vocational services and addressing these needs for individuals with autism. Next to the right, in terms of average agreement about the organization's ability to address the broader systems capacity or the broader needs of people with developmental disabilities. Remember, those were things like there might be community integration, mental health, social support, transportation. The mean ranking was still quite high. 75% of organizational leaders felt that they were addressing this issue quite well. In terms of the next category, organizations' integration of service planning and evaluation, the scores coming down. In other words, 62.2 suggested perceived lower levels of service planning and evaluation in programs. So less attention being put there. But remember, for the fourth category, we turned the dime. And rather than focusing on one's organization, the average spoke to less capacity, a mean of 57.8, suggesting a relatively tepid ranking of community capacity. So how well were we doing as a community to address the employment or vocational needs of people with autism? Overall, community capacity to address vocational needs appears underdeveloped. Is that a surprise to people here? We've got some ways to go, but I'm encouraged by some of the movement forward as we see here today. Let's look at the perspectives of individuals with autism and their family. First, as you see there, the demographics are fairly typical profile of the population of autism. There is a range of participant age, urban and rural representation, very varying presentation, and we need to think carefully about the broad spectrum of disability. And generally, but at the bottom, the individuals in this sample had a relatively small nucleus of perceived family and other supports. Yet the support was critical to individuals on the autism spectrum, particularly given a general lack of other community support. That's what individuals told us. A bit different of a presentation than what service providers had conveyed. Notably, in terms of finding a job, not far behind the successful job placement of multiple individuals with autism was a family member, often a mother, who was quietly working in the background, diligently digging, networking, struggling, advocating, troubleshooting. We need to honor the parents and the mothers and those who care deeply and love those, as they worked hard to support their children. What was challenging and different now, though, in adulthood, was that unlike in childhood, where the parents were also working diligently to make it work for their children, the way we operate for and with adults in the workplace family members were typically not welcome in these dialogues. So the individual with autism was sometimes left with limited opportunity to work, and the parent was also left out, yet the responsibility by default for job access was very often, too often, left to the parent. They were ascribed the role, the responsibility, but not the authority, often left with a muted or an invisible voice in this process. On the other hand, if parents or siblings or someone who deeply cared didn't subtly fulfill these roles in some cases, not in all, the aim of vocational opportunity was too often not reached to the capacity it could be. This is, I think, where there's great potential and room for opportunity in moving forward. And we've been hearing about some of these important moves forward over these 2 days. The interviews with individuals with disability and their families thus displayed a fairly extensive disparity from what organizations purported was available to individuals and families, which renders some real system gaps and areas to move forward in. While saying this, I want to be careful, as we have heard extensively, and we see this throughout our province and across the country. I want to honor the commitment of many organizations that we encountered in the study and many others that are working hard, often with limited resources, and caring, and a cadre of caring service providers diligently pushing through. And indeed, we heard some wonderful stories of commitment and ingenuity in both urban and rural settings. Yet agencies largely conveyed a mandate of activities, often more focused on the tangibles of work preparation. So they were things at the front end, like resume writing or interviewing skills, all important. But individuals in this study and their family members also sought the arguably harder work of following through to employment stability, getting and keeping and advancing in that job. For a person with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions, that may take both targeted support relative to the unique needs and a broader base of support in addressing the broader determinants of health. And we've heard about that. There might be pieces related to mental health or community integration or transportation. It's not enough to have a job, but it's difficult to get to the job. Agencies largely conveyed a mandate of activities more focused on some of those tangible pieces. And participants, in turn, particularly individuals and family members, told us great success stories, and we've heard some of those here, and there's many others, but they also told difficult stories that we've also heard of struggling to find a job, then finally getting that job, hopefully, and in some case, only to ultimately face personal struggle of not being able to meet the demands of the job, often with little or no job support. And then this is what caught our attention, deeply personalizing that experience and denigrating the self as failing, when rather we could look beyond at the system that are we doing what we could be doing. Here's some examples. Some of the challenges that individuals described. First of all, in terms of emotional, psychological challenges, a great deal of anxiety and, to a degree, mental health challenges that impacted work. Now remember, think about as we go through this list, the specific areas in which we could intervene in all of these areas to make work life be a much better experience for individuals with a range of disabilities. Lack of confidence. Now, if somebody continues to have a negative experience, the confidence level decreases, and self-esteem was a challenge. In terms of this particular population, a challenge was focus and concentration. So here's a quote from a mother who said, speaking of her son, he can't think about doing 4 things at once. He can focus on one. And incidentally, he could focus on that one very well. So think about job carving. How can we do that? Another, study for hours and see patterns but can't remember. Jobs often did not fit the individual's predispositions for optimal type of work or pace of work or other characteristics of the job. In terms of environmental or processing challenges, there was an extensive amount of sensory issues in the workplace, with some accommodations could be dealt with. There was verbal details, but not put in written form, not that extra step to make the task doable, but these tasks are very doable. People talked about having insufficient time to process tasks or emotions, not enough time to decompress from the pressure cooker of the workplace. And are there ways that we can manage that better, given what someone brings to that work experience? And then there was a set of challenges that were in the realm of social and relational areas. Issues of dealing with colleagues and supervisors who, the word that people said was, they didn't quite get it. Or sometimes they said they didn't get it at all. Others were not direct in communication, which was a challenge to understand. There was that whole social sense of having to read someone's expression and the things that weren't said. Individuals were, with autism here, were critiqued for being too honest. Now think of it, being honest is a virtue, but they were critiqued for that. Sometimes their directness of communication was viewed as overly blunt. They were critiqued for poor eye contact and having difficulty in socially interacting with strangers, which often was a challenge, particularly as we think about people entering the workforce. And entry-level jobs are often in the areas of retail or hospitality, dealing with the public, with strangers, and that kind of interactivity is sought after, may not be the ideal fit. There are other issues that were more on the physical realm. Sleep issues, we've heard of them. Health challenges that weren't well understood among adults and sometimes weren't well treated, which had a bearing on how people could manage in their day-to-day life in the workplace. All right, so some findings point to some system issues. First of all, there were reported good intentions on the part of employers and a broader community ethic, but along with that is a more troublesome lack of opportunity and room for meaningful support. Now, I am encouraged by the changes, and we see this in Alberta and beyond. We need to think about how can everyone win. There is varying and often poor transition support from high school to the next step in the life, and we again have heard about those challenges. More of a focus on the practical issues in job preparation rather than retention and maintenance and advancement of that job. So that's an area to really focus on in moving forward. There were particular issues for families who are living in poverty or facing other challenges, perhaps in isolated populations, such as rural or remote communities where service access was much less accessible. And as we've spoken about, an overall lack of connection to broader and contextual issues and needs. We need to move away from that siloed sense and how can we work together. And I'm encouraged by the work that's happening as people collaborate and work together in the discussion about that. So where did that lead us? I want to finish with this model, which we've called an integrated model of work success. And I'll walk through it here. At both the left and right sides of the central diamond, the diamond's depicted as the vocational aim or pinnacle, or I could say the gem, the diamond, of job access, job engagement, retention, and advancement. We haven't talked enough about that. At that pinnacle are resources to support individuals to move forward vocationally. On the left of the diamond, tailored individual support for individuals with developmental disability are beneficial, and these will vary from person to person. We need to think about what fits for the individual. But items such as job preparation, so job skills, the hard skills of the job, and the soft skills. We've heard about some of the social skills that we spend a lot of time in some of that water cooler talk, the social pieces that can make or break one's ability to navigate successfully in the job. Job access, so fit of the job and job supports for the individual relative to needs and their job requirements. And job retention, advancement support. So that's on the left. And on the right of the diamond, family navigation assistance and ongoing support as needed. This includes honoring the family's role relative to the care and support for the individual, but also augmenting and or easing that role as makes sense. And in the employment community, there is less of an amenity, so we need to then augment that and support as makes sense, so that families are not relegated by default to responsibility for job access. Critical in moving forward. On the vertical of the model, so both above and below the diamond, are key components of broader contextual components that appear to have a bearing on employment or vocational opportunity. First, at the top, the need to address structural and program issues with targeted resources that meet vocational needs. That's why we're all here, to move this forward. And at the bottom, building capacity in the workplace, in the community, making the job fit for the person rather than solely focusing or primarily focusing on what has traditionally been making the person fit for the job. Rather, can we carve jobs to fit for the person? So it's win-win. Thinking strategically and setting up for success. We need to build community and employer capacity. That's been a real emphasis as we move forward. Thinking strategically and creatively and using common sense around workplace accommodations. And lastly, supporting the broader needs, some people call them social determinants of health, as they address more equitable opportunities, in this case for obtaining and retaining and advancing meaningful vocational activity for people with disabilities. As I conclude, just a few ideas in moving forward. First of all, employing people with disabilities makes business sense. It adds to meaningfulness in life. We don't talk enough about what our job means to us, hence what not being able to access a job means. Let's think about that in terms of moving forward. Let's make this a priority, and I know it is. That's why we're all here. Further, model development and evaluation, doing better what we do, really targeting on working towards as good approaches as we can get, working together, networking. Given evidence of the gains in early and protracted intervention, we've talked about this, early engagement of youth in vocational support and skill development pathways appears to be a promising, important way to move forward. The highway into adulthood, giving people more time to prepare, to find their niche, to find what works and what doesn't, to have starts and stops and realize that that's part of it. And that's not failure, that's moving towards the end of vocational success. Capacity building, so important, and I applaud the organizers of this event for their work in this very area. Resources that move to a win-win. We've talked about peer-based experiential learning in community for employers and employees. So for the individuals with disabilities, there's emerging work in this area, but also for employers, finding the champions out there and building on that and moving forward. as we move forward, there is a need for a greater focus on fit in the workplace relative to employee and employer needs. Thinking about preparedness and workplace stability as a continuum of moving forward. Employer engagement and advancement of workplace opportunity according to strategies. And finally, integrating resources to meet needs that are tailored to the individual in setting up success that is specific to the needs of an individual, but also is broad-based to get at the issues of community inclusion and change and moving forward. In closing, I interviewed a woman in our work who was a colleague in an office with a person who was also in that setting, in that work setting. The other individual had autism. This woman who I spoke to, who didn't have a disability, chronicled her journey, a shift from resisting getting involved with this individual, in fact, being somewhat opposed, to over time developing somewhat of a supportive role in the workplace. And she talked about developing a relationship as a peer and colleague. She talked about, with admiration and endearment, what an example of loyalty this individual, this young man with autism, brought to the company. She went on about what a diligent worker he is. And then she reflected on her own journey. As the relationship was built, she said, so was a deepening trust and respect. Yet she reflected on what earlier she viewed as she looked critically at herself. She described it, her limiting attitudes. In contrast, in thinking about where she'd come, she described now what she realized, the richness and productivity of a welcoming, inclusive workplace for all. And she talked about the benefit of that for that individual with a disability, for the organization, the strength of the organization, and for her as part of the inclusive workplace and a more welcoming community at large. May it be so. As I was leaving that interview on that particular day, she seemed to be in a reflective tone of thought in terms of where she had come from. And as I was getting ready to leave, she said to me, thinking about this research and some of our work, and musing over her experience, she said, make sure you tell them, really, she was saying, tell us, what an opportunity we have to be strong organizations with rich diversity and successful organizations. It makes sense at so many levels. We've heard that kind of message in the various presentations that we've heard throughout these 2 days, and she reiterated that. And I think these data speak to us moving forward and continuing to forge forward, and what she left us with, let's take action, let's move forward. Thank you.